Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I am excited because we are actually going to be starting a brand new series called Behind the Scenes, and it's basically going to be me one-on-one with some of the producers of South Florida's largest events, including like Ultra, and today's guest, which is Glenn Weinzimmer, who is the founder of the Smart Ride, which is the southernmost AIDS ride. And rarely do I get to say this, but Glenn, you're my first.
That is probably the first for you to ever say.
I'm just saying, you get to be literally my first guest on this brand new segment.
Well, the good news is the bar is set low, so you can only go up from there.
Exactly, Bart. No, God, no. Actually, I'm actually really excited about this conversation because I've known you for a really long time, and I've been part of the Smart Ride for a really long time. But I thought it was kind of important that we have this conversation so that people understand, what the Smart Ride is. But before we get into all of that, I want to know about you. Glenn, you've been doing the Smart Ride for a really long time. You're also the owner of a local restaurant called Bona Italian that is part of the 5 Points culture. But I don't think a lot of people really understand where you started. Can you fill us in and like what were your first couple of jobs? Why did you even get involved in hospitality?
Sure. I went to school in Denver, and I studied hotel and restaurant management and a degree in marketing. And I graduated from school and moved back up to New York and worked for a hotel. Then got recruited. I did a little stint in retail with custom shirts, which it's a whole nother segment.
I was about to say.
Yeah, older. I'm a Jew, but older Jewish man would show up every day in his car and his little thing of tuna, and he'd bring it in, and he made us crazy.
Wow.
So I did that for about 6 months to get my custom shirts for free, and then I quit and I went to work for Intercontinental Hotels, and they moved me to South Florida, and I did that for several years. Went to a couple of different properties, became the director of sales at Hyatt and Coral Gables, and opened that property. And then in 1992, right after Hurricane Andrew, I started not to feel well. And I went a full year, it turned out, with walking pneumonia and had PCP. And so By the time I found out that I was HIV positive, that they had told my family that I had 10 days to live and I had 7 T cells. And, you can go through all that drama of what happens at that point and how your life takes a turn, and things that were important suddenly aren't important anymore. Things aren't as materialistic, but thank God I got some of that back. But at that time, none of that mattered, and I spent 2 years pretty much at home vegging, and, I was forced into retirement at the age of 32, and that made me angry. And I didn't want to be a statistic. And so I held on, and I had a theory of my own that I would get up in the morning and say, today's not a good day to die. It would be really easy. And I understood how people would say, they looked fine last night when they went to bed, but then they were dead in the morning. And I really understood what that meant. And so I'd set really short-term goals. And I started volunteering because my doctor at the time knows that I'm such an A-type personality like you are, Keith. Yeah. And they had to keep me busy. So by getting me out of the house and volunteering, I started to get engaged in things that I had never done before. I was always very self-centered, and it was all about the bigger car or the better suit or the nicer tie. And it was never really about giving back and doing other things for people. And through volunteering, I ended up getting involved in what was the Pallotta Teamworks bicycle ride that went from Orlando to Key West. It happened every March, and they had 1,000 people on it the very first year, and my ex rode in it, and I was there to support it, and fell in love with what they were doing, but not in the way they were doing it. And unfortunately, they raised $1 million, and only 80,000 of $1 million. So 80,000 out of $1 million, so $920,000 went to expenses and didn't go back to help the organizations and the people at the height of the pandemic that really needed the help.
Well, and I remember that because I was in Texas, and we had the Texas AIDS Ride, which was done by the same organization, and I remember having the same issues. Like, there was a huge report that came out that here's this ride that supposedly raised $1 million, but 900,000 of it went to quote unquote production costs. All right, so you've moved from New York, you're here in South Florida, you've been forced into retirement because of HIV. You're part of this ride. You see this massive waste that is happening on this ride, and then you jumped at an opportunity to do something different?
Yeah, actually, I started volunteering for them. They had because you said you had the Texas one was called TAR, Texas AIDS Ride. Florida was Florida AIDS Ride, and there was cars. It was California, et cetera, et cetera. NAR was New York. And I volunteered for the second generation of that, which became the Walgreens Red Ribbon Ride. And
Right.
Walgreens was the title sponsor, and Clear Channel Communications, which is great at concerts and one-day events, had taken over the production of and the expense of producing the event. But they also knew they weren't really good at that kind of an event, and I was their full-time volunteer. And they had shrank down in 2001 to 97 riders. And they lost money. The agencies didn't get any money. And at that point, I was still volunteering. And I knew they probably weren't going to go forward with it. And I was asked to be the keynote speaker because they had a really low budget and they had nobody to talk to. So, hey, that's fun. They'll do it. So, I was free that weekend. I wasn't working in the Catskills doing my usual shtick at the Borscht Belt. So I got up and challenged everyone, never with the intention of me doing anything. It was more about motivating people and getting them to understand how what we do is so important and how we need to take more responsibility. So probably about a month after that ride ended, I got a call from Clear Health, and they said, if you'll do what you said from the stage, we'll give you all the equipment because we really believe in this, but we know we can't do it. And I said I would do it only if we could guarantee that 100% of every dollar raised goes to charity, and that individuals have a degree of control of how their money is distributed amongst the chosen agencies.
So that's and I know that that's a thing, and we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. But that's actually how it all started. Was you were like, look, if I'm going to do this, and this is somebody else's organization at this point, right?
Yeah.
So and you're a volunteer, and you're like, look, I'm gonna do this, but I want 100% of to go back to the benefiting agencies. Now, how did they react to that? I mean, I can't imagine that you're a for-profit company that's trying to do something nice that say, wait, you want me to give all of the money back? We don't get to cover our production cost at all?
So they were parting ways. They were not going to be having anything to do with the event. So what they were offering me was basically the equipment and their support, but we were no longer would be affiliated. They just said, if you want, if you can do it, you can have it because we're not going to be competing against you.
Right.
And we were encouraging you to do what to do and motivate people to do good and get the best out of them. And so I said yes without thinking, really quick. And then afterwards went, what the hell did I just do? And how am I going to pull this off? And, it took a year, really almost a year and a half before we actually launched the actual event. Yeah. And it was a big learning curve of, getting involved with people that, were more about profit on their end if they were going to be engaged in how much money can they make from these sponsors. And it was the same thing with Clear Channel. Like they were making money off the sponsors.
Well, you know what they say? They say accidents make people, and I feel like this. Your instantaneous response was maybe a little bit of an accident, but now I'm, obviously it's grown to a much bigger thing. But so you say yes. You're dealing with people that say, how do we make money? And you're the one voice that says, no, this is going to be something that we give everything back. Right. So that's got to be a challenge.
So it was because, I didn't even know who would buy in and take do this. So I did some feelers out to people that had been involved in the ride for years that had ridden, and I got like a confirmation from Tampa, one from Orlando, all the places where we would eventually have benefiting agencies, and also wanted to change the route. It was 3 days from Orlando to Fort Lauderdale or Miami. And to Key West, we could do it in 2 days, and that would cut a lot of our expenses out for food and housing and all of that. So economically, and it also is a destination. And I felt like a lot of people would say, "Oh, I've never done this before, but I want to go to Key West. So maybe this is a good opportunity." And so that was kind of what it was. And I had one other person that worked with me for a good 8 months. And then we added in all the folks that used to get paid to be specialists in these different areas, whether it be our crew manager or crew lead, whether it be our logistics people. They all said, we want to do this and we want to help and we want to volunteer. So they jumped in with all their levels of expertise, and we would meet on a weekly basis. At that point, the agencies weren't involved at all. All they had to do was show up on the event.
Right.
We did everything else those first couple of years, and all those volunteers gave of their time and their expertise, and that's how we were able to build it. But the first year we did it with zero budget. I remember, I got, we were doing some things and they're like, are we getting phones or radios? And I'm like, no, there is no money for phones or radios. And they were like, well, what are we going to do? I'm like, we're going to use our own cell phones. And, they wanted to buy plastic bins. And I'm like, we can't afford plastic bins. We're going to put everything in cardboard. And of course, the first day it rains and everything
Right.
out of the cardboard. And so somebody ran out and volunteered and paid for the bins. But we got everything borrowed. All the food was donated, pretty much everything. And I remember, and you've met my sister. I remember my sister calling me about 2 months before the actual event. And I knew at that point we had like 200 people registered. And she said, how bad could this be? And I was like,
okay.
And I was like, it could be like $15,000 in the hole, but you're only as good as your word. And so I said, like, I will use every credit card I have, but I'm not going against my word. This is a one-time event. I want to prove a point. And she said, well, don't worry about it. We're in a good position. If you're short, we'll pick it up. So I had that in the back of my mind. I didn't want to use it, but I had in the back of my mind that at least I had a little bit of a safety net. And in the end, once we got, commission on some hotels and things like that, we ended up $300 in the black. And we were able to give away $169,000 that year, which was 100% of everything that we brought in. And then, we were ready to walk away. I was done. I proved my point.
Well, first of all, let me just, because hearing this as a newbie, I would be completely like, what do you mean? You walked into this event. It's not an easy event to put on. You basically have 200 people's lives in your hands because they're on a bicycle from Miami to Key West, and you were going to lose money on it. What? You sound crazy. No offense, but you sound like you are crazy for even thinking about this. And this was all because of what you said on stage or what you had talked about?
It was a level of frustration of seeing money not go back, and then from what I said on the stage, and I just felt like that we could do this. And you live once, and if any other business person had analyzed what we were doing, they would never have done it. I come from, my father's extremely conservative as an accountant. This would never fly with him.
I was about to say.
For him, he always wanted to buy a house, but he had the deposit, but he was worried about the monthly fee, or he had the money for the monthly mortgage, but he didn't have the down payment. And I always jumped in and did that anyway, because I figured there's always a way to figure it out. I'm a firm believer that if you really set your mind to something, it will come. And that's what happened. We just, like, everything fell into place. People believed when I sat down and talked to them what we were doing. And they wanted to be a part of it. So, we weren't asking for a lot from anyone at that point because there was 200 people.
But how much of this was because you had gotten so sick and you didn't know if you were going to make it to the next day? How much of this drive actually was like, you know what, I have one more chance to do this? Not knowing, obviously, that drugs and everything else would come a long way.
Right.
How much of this was that?
I'm sure a good 70%, 60%, probably 70% had to do with the fact that I had seen other friends who were similar to me that had the same kind of T-cell counts, were on the same medication, seeing the same doctors, and they didn't make it. And I felt like I had been more fortunate because I had a really good job and I was able to retire and live off of the income from that for several years. And I needed a sense of purpose because as citizens, as people, when we get introduced to somebody at a party or at a friend's house or at a dinner or wherever you might be, they go, hey, so nice to meet you. So Keith, what do you do? It's a natural instinct to start the conversation. And I found myself with a lack of purpose because I didn't want to lie. Because if I said, oh, I'm retired, they're like, good for you, 32, that's amazing. And I'm like, yeah, not so much.
I'm being forced to retire.
Right. And when I said, oh, I became a race car driver, they didn't believe me. So, it was this one, part of it was that self-identity of like, who am I? Everything that I had planned and everything I had scheduled was now completely thrown out the window. And that's an easy way for depression. So I think a lot of this was a part of guilt of being a survivor when others didn't make it. And why did I make it and they didn't? Some of it is part of my stubborn personality. Some of it was I don't like to be told no. And so I knew that there's a way to do this. And we did it. And now we're 17 years in.
Well, and was it always called the Smart Ride?
No, the very first year we had some help with a marketing company, bless her heart. And she called it, I had gotten these little teddy bears that the post office used to sell there was an AIDS ribbon in a little pocket. And they were funny. So the very first year I was selling teddy bears in front of Georgie's Alibi. They were the bar that we were at all the time. and we had a little table, and I would sell the bears for $10 a piece or whatever it was. And so when I went back to the office one afternoon, and this woman that was helping us, she's like, we decided we're going to call it Bike It and Bear It. And I was like, huh? And
Bear it.
And I was like, barebacking, for those that don't know, in the LGBT community means, no condoms. And here we're talking about HIV and AIDS, and it's the complete opposite of what you'd want. I had people say, are they hairy bears on bikes? Like, what is that?
Exactly. That's what I would have thought. I would have been like, bear it, meaning, the bear community, but wow.
So we were stuck with that because we were they had the upper hand at that point, as they were trying to market us. And we parted company not too soon after that, but we made it work for the first year. And then at a red light, I was trying to think of what the name should be, and I came up with the Smart Ride. Smart meaning Southernmost AIDS HIV Ride. And then the T stood for any of the years that we were in. It was year 2 at that point, then year 3. And then we had to go to like 2006 because I needed the T again. So so there are certain years where we go T the year, and some years where you actually say the number of the year. But that's how we came up with the new name. So the second year was actually called the Smart Ride.
So actually, there's not really, when you say year 1 of Smart Ride, it was actually Bike It and Bear It. But I'm fascinated with the idea that you were able to convince 200 people to get on a bicycle from Miami to Key West.
Hey, I got your butt on the bike.
That was second year. I have to say that was second year. But, but for a first year kind of event, I don't know 200 bicyclists, people that are comfortable on a bicycle. Well, I do now, obviously, because of Smart Ride. But, and as a newbie that was just starting on the second ride, I obviously was getting on the bicycle in blind faith and the idea that, this could be fun. But how do you convince 200 people at the very beginning to say, yeah, believe me, we're going to keep you safe, and we're going to be able to get you down to Key West on that little 2-lane road with all these semis flying by you? Why,
So
a little bit. Tell us a little bit about that.
So for like a good solid 2.5 years or 3 years of the old ride, the Walgreens Red Ribbon Ride, then became the Sunshine Ride for AIDS, that I was one of the rider reps. I was one of the people that was on the phone talking to the riders, finding out how their training was going, seeing how their fundraising was going and stuff. So I had a reputation or a rapport with a lot of past riders. I knew that they were as frustrated as I was about doing this event and the money not making it. And I knew that was my core. And I was able, like I said earlier, to convince a few in each one of these little communities to talk to some of their friends who had been involved at some point and say, he's giving back 100%. And we believe what he's saying. He's not going to go back on his word. So let's do it. And there was from some of the agencies, there was a lot of skepticism because, how many people come into an office with a great idea, and then the guy never follows through or never does what he says he's going to do or doesn't show up and the event's a flop. And we had one of the agencies that did take that route. And we immediately called them and said, you'll get what we promised, but you're not invited back because you didn't trust us. And you didn't,
and just real quick, you've mentioned the word agencies multiple times, but I don't think everybody understands what an agency is when it comes to the ride.
Okay. So
what is an agency?
So Smart Ride benefits AIDS service organizations that do testing, that do connection to services, that help people with emergency housing, that help pay for co-pays of medications, which is certain pills can cost $1,800 a month. And if they can keep their health insurance up, they can't afford those medications. So we work with agencies around the state of Florida. In Key West, it's called AH of Monroe, which used to be called AIDS Help. In Miami, it's Pride Lines, which used to be Pride Lines Youth Services, and they were getting a lot of their HIV, although they're a GLCC, Gay and Lesbian Community Center, they were getting a lot of their clients from individuals that were younger and thrown out of their homes because of their sexual orientation or the LGBT, just all of that. And in order to survive, a lot of these folks end up on the streets to just survive, and they're coming from places that may not be as educated and as school-wise and stuff to know what HIV and what AIDS is. So they go out there and basically sell their bodies, and then by the time they get to a place like Pride Lines, 75% of them at one point were positive. So they've got these kids that are homeless. that have potential that just tried to survive. So that's Pride Lines in Miami. Then you get up to Fort Lauderdale, and it's Broward House. And Broward House is a strong substance abuse and housing for a lot of minorities. They have a lot of housing and stuff, and they've been in this since the very beginning. It's like I think they're on like 30 some odd years of having been in this fight since the early days of HIV and AIDS. And then you go up to further north, we're at Compasson, which is also a gay and lesbian community center, but they're in Palm Beach, and they do a lot of testing and social work and the same kind of outreach and going to bars and other locations to try to educate and teach in schools and make sure that people know that HIV and AIDS is still a thing, because there's this whole story about that, but we'll save that. And then you go up to Orlando, and it's called Miracle of Love. And Miracle of Love, like most of our agencies, deals with more minorities and underserved and economically depressed. But they are truly more of an African-American based agency, and they have a disproportionate amount of people getting infected because of stigma. Like the Latin American community, they don't talk about it, and then they're passing it on. So they've got a big challenge ahead of them, because they can get people, and here's another word we're going to have to explain, but PrEP, for those who don't know it, is a way to not pass the disease on if you're on PrEP. But because they're so worried about someone thinking they might be gay or that they have it, they hide the pills or they don't take them, even if they can get them for free. So they have to deal with that stigma up in Orlando. And then the last agency is Metro Wellness, or Metro Inclusive, as they changed their name to. And they're in Tampa and St. Pete. They're a huge organization. They have a full medical facility on site and everything else, and they do all kinds of care. And so when I say agencies, they're AIDS service organizations that support the work in the community. And then, as you know, there's something called the 10% Lifeline, which will just confuse everybody altogether.
Well, and we'll talk about that a little bit, because I still want to go back 17 years, right? I still want to go back to the 17 years ago. You're this HIV positive person that has got very low T cells, trying to do something that nobody else has been able to do.
My pretty mask?
Yeah, and your pretty mask, absolutely. And, and obviously for a lot of people that are out there that are over the age of 40, the 80s and 90s were basically hellish when it came to HIV and AIDS. So it was a huge deal, but there was a lot of stigma that came with it. How as an individual, how did you overcome not only the fact that you were starting a brand new ride that nobody was able to do before because you were doing 100% give back, but how were you also dealing with all the stigma and possibly even the hate that was out there during that time?
I think that my family, probably similar to your mom, who I've met and love, is very liberal. Yeah. And because I got so sick so fast, they were all heavily involved in what was happening. Also because my sister was getting married 4 weeks later. So
I didn't know that. Actually.
So when I was in the hospital, the one thing I didn't want to do was I didn't want to ruin the wedding.
Yeah, I get it. And so you needed a reason to stay there.
And my parents needed support, so they told everybody. So when I got to that wedding, everybody knew.
Oh, no.
Yes, it was great.
You became the center of attention for all the wrong reasons.
Correct. Wow. So that gave me an upper hand against. I think when you have to hide whatever it is, that whether it be cancer or your sexual orientation or your HIV status, especially back then when it was so stigmatized, having the support and having an open dialogue makes it so much easier to get through those things. Because it's not one more thing. I'm lying to this person. Everybody knew. So I had that that I wasn't worried about someone finding out, because I felt like I have nothing to lose. I'm an open book, and if you have a question, just ask me. I mean, I can't change what happened, and I owned that. I owned that. I knew that it wasn't from being overly promiscuous. I knew I dated somebody, is how I found out that I got it. I know that he didn't know at the time. So it was just one of those circumstances, and yes, there's stigma, and there were people that go, I don't want to support your organization because I'm not going to get it, and they'll be like, I'll catch you in 6 months, Right. But and I volunteered for an agency down in Miami as well, so I had gotten some meeting a lot of other people and stuff, so I had the self-confidence that wasn't what was going to do me in. So yeah, I just dealt with it.
Well, and I think that you probably had some closet supporters, so to speak. People that were able to give money to a bike ride, quote unquote, and not specifically HIV/AIDS charities. That may have helped. I mean, that's me thinking along the lines of, here we're dealing with all these stigmas,
right?
And yet I still want to do something. Well, I can write a check to a bicyclist,
right? And you can say, I'm doing it for other people that
right.
need it. You're not doing it to raise money for yourself. And that has always been a big thing when it comes to fundraising for any organization. I don't care if it's cancer care, I don't care if it's heart disease or saving dogs, the Humane Society, or any of those. When you're asking people to give you money to help other people, it's much easier when you own that, as opposed to saying, I am embarrassed to ask for money. Well, you're not asking for someone to buy you lunch. You're asking someone to help other people. And I believe strongly that people want to do good, that they have an innate desire to make a difference, but they don't always know the avenue in which to be able to accomplish that. So in many ways, you're giving people an opportunity to do good. You're helping them direct that energy and make change. And it has been amazing that even for me, when I sent out letters my very first year, there are people I said it to, and I was like, I think they're going to go tell me to F off, this is my 100%. Problem. I deserved it, blah, blah, blah. And what I came to find, even with sponsors, was the president of a company lost their son. That there was a connection to someone in their office, even though they were a conservative family from a conservative city, but they had lost someone that they had worked with or a business partner for years. And suddenly they had that loss, and they didn't know how to deal with it without, they don't want to make a public statement. They don't want to make this their thing and be judged.
Well, because they couldn't, probably.
Correct. Probably, because we were talking 30 years ago. And so, things have changed quite a bit in the last 30 years. And when it comes to the LGBT community, if there's anything, and I'm careful how I say this, if there's anything that good that came out of HIV and more AIDS, was the fact that it brought a community of people together that ended up starting lots of organizations, and whether it be HRC, Human Rights Campaign, or Equality Florida, or any of those, they're a direct result of fighting for the rights of people that were dying, that they needed to make sure their friends were being taken care of. And all these AIDS service organizations that I talked about, they didn't start out as these companies with, a big CEO and stuff. They started out with a group of friends getting together and saying, I don't want my friend to be homeless because they're dying and they can't work. So we need to find a way to raise money to feed them, keep them with their pets, keep them in their apartment. We're all talking about the time when you could have been with someone for 10 years, and when you died, your partner had absolutely no rights to anything, and families would come in and take everything from them. And so there was all kinds of things going on, but these AIDS service organizations started out with as grassroots as you can come. The Gay Men's Health Crisis in New York was a group of friends, and now it's a major company and they've got experts doing everything, but it didn't start that way.
So okay. 17 years ago, I totally get it. So HIV is a big thing. It's killing lots of people, but now there's a million different drugs available. People are living healthy, long lives. Why is HIV still a thing? Why should we still be worried about it? Why are there smart rights?
Sure. There's two things to consider. There's those who were that have survived AIDS, which is you've gotten a what do they call it? That it's infection, but it's a opportunistic infection, meaning that you had something like KS, which is black and blue, basically is cancer of the skin, or pneumonitis where you're losing your eyes, or PCP, which is pneumonia. So if you had gotten any of those things, that's when you were designated as actually you have full-blown AIDS.
Right.
A lot of those people from that time survived that thought they weren't going to. A lot of them have suffered from taking these drugs for so many years that they now have new issues. They have new heart disease. They have higher blood pressure. They've got, more incidence of cancer. There's things that happened as a result of these drugs that saved their lives, but it's a whole new level of things that are not necessarily genetic in their families that they're now suffering from. I take one HIV med a day, but I take 13 pills before I go to bed, and everything is basically, in my opinion, a result of the disease. It's take on your liver, trying to filter out all these chemicals. There's lots of things that happen. So there's still a huge group of people that don't have they lost their jobs, may have gone back to work, but it's not the same career. And so they live honest, hardworking lives, but they can't accomplish what they had before. And so these organizations help with that. The other big thing is that HIV and AIDS, especially HIV right now, because we still have people getting AIDS and dying. Like I know of 3 people this year, but
wait. So I'm sorry, people are still dying. I mean, that's an actual question.
No,
because
they
honestly, if I was just out there in the community, I don't hear about people dying still. And you're telling me that people are still dying of HIV and AIDS?
Yeah. And one of them, is David. I don't want to say his last name, but David that worked where you used to work when you were.
Yeah.
And
100%.
He's my understanding is he stopped taking his medications, or he didn't have the copay for it, or whatever he chose. But when you saw pictures of him a few days before he passed, I mean, he looked like someone from the 80s. His eyes were really deep and recessed. He was having all kinds of issues and stuff, and his system was shut down. And so I know of like 3 people. Actually, we did a fundraiser at my restaurant 2 weeks ago, because there's a guy, I've known him forever. He eats in our restaurant twice a week with his husband. And he just started to go downhill, and he passed of AIDS with a T cell count of like 6.
And he was taking the meds, and it was just his body just wasn't accepting it.
Yeah, and I don't know all the details of how regimented he was, or whether he got sloppy with it and saying, I don't need to take them, and it caught up with him. Like, I don't know all those details, but people still are dying of it. And then you take the group that's getting infected at the highest rate, it's ages 13 to 21. So kids
Young people,
13 to 21 are getting HIV at the highest rate right now, because teenagers think, as we did when we were teenagers, that we're invincible.
Right.
So this isn't going to happen to me, or there's a pill I can take so I don't have to worry about it. And so they might take the antiretroviral or the PrEP when they think they're going to have a fun weekend, where you really need to stay on it as a regimen. If you start and commit to it, you've got to commit to it so that it isn't a party drug you take as a, after sex thing so you don't get pregnant. I mean, like, there is no morning after pill. So you need to be, and so we're seeing that growth. And then that growth, when you take 13 to 21-year-olds, it's also very heavily in going back to the minority population. So you're looking at Latin Americans that won't talk about it. You're looking at African Americans that won't talk about it, churches that won't discuss it. And so these kids are not being educated on it because they don't want to talk about that. Like, it's not
I can't believe it. Here we are, in the 2020, and yet there are still things that are happening. And the other part that I wanted to specifically kind of lead you to is secondary infections. That people that have HIV and AIDS, the disease is being controlled by these drugs, but that also means that they're living long enough for their immune systems to be susceptible to cancer, to thyroid disease, to diabetes. I mean, that these are secondary infections that are caused by the fact that their body's working so hard to fight against HIV and AIDS. And so, that's why when I was saying, is HIV still a thing? I feel like it still is, because there's secondary things that a lot of people don't even understand. And that, there's still a massive stigma, because everybody has been educated about how to keep HIV from, catching HIV, or that there's these drugs, that if all of a sudden somebody needs help, with their copays, they don't want to tell their coworkers. It's It's the same kind. I feel like we're repeating the 1980s all over again.
Yeah, we sit on that cusp of that happening, and so this leads into a really good story from like 2 or 3 years ago. One of our sponsors is a very conservative, white good boys old club. Mostly male, it's the old good boys thing. And they had been sponsoring us, and I never really understood why. Turns out one of their writers happened to be gay and was involved, and he was high enough up at this company that they were giving us money. And he had left since then, and I went up to meet with the new rep, and she said to me, "I know we give you money every year, but why? AIDS isn't a thing." And I just looked at her, and we stopped talking about sponsorship. And she was, it's not politically correct, but she was, the blonde hair, blue-eyed woman, thin, looks like she plays tennis on weekends.
Yeah, but you know what? She's probably thinking like a lot of people. AIDS isn't a thing.
Right. So I said to her, do you have kids? And she said yes. She goes, one's like 11 and one's like 13. And so I said, so that, this whole, like, you live in a ticky-tack world. Every house in your gated community looks exactly the same. Your neighbors are all the same age. You all have the kids at the same age. But at some point, Johnny or Susie is going to start experimenting, and you've not talked to them about this. So you got a great little community, and suddenly you can have a mini pandemic in your own area that's been started because none of your neighbors and none of you are talking to your kids. And I said, sometimes it's as simple as you don't have to address them, but they have to hear it. So, and this goes back to the people that donate to the ride, and we can talk about that in a second. But when somebody makes a donation to the ride and your spouse, your partner, whatever it is, looks at the credit card bills and says, Keith, why did you give $100 to Glenn for this? It says Smart Ride. Oh, it's an AIDS bike ride. Oh, I didn't think AIDS was a thing anymore. No, he's doing this and blah, 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 blah. There are kids at the table. They overhear it. Kids they don't like to be lectured to, but they do pick up what you say. And they might go ask a friend.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll ask a friend. My parents were talking about this. Do you know anything about it? They'll start Googling it. And maybe when they have to make a decision, it'll pop back up that I remember this. Like, there's something I should be doing before I just agree to have sex with this person or whatever it might be. And I think that, there's so many ways to be able to communicate to the younger generation. We also have to find a way, as my generation, because I just turned 60, starts to age out, and they've been the advocates for the last 35 years, who's coming in behind? And so how do you make that transition to make what was important to me was AIDS? That's what I knew. What they know as kids right now is HIV. So when we talk about AIDS, they don't connect, they don't relate. You have to find out, how do you connect with them about HIV? How do you get them to understand that, yes, you might not catch it if you take this pill, but you might get some other sexually transmitted disease that is not curable. You can still get hepatitis, you can still get, chlamydia, you can still get herpes, that you don't have to if you're careful. So yes, you might not get the HIV, but there's other things that you still have to worry about, getting pregnant or whatever that might be.
And does the ride help bridge that? Does the ride help bridge that generational divide, because it gives you something common to focus on?
So I think it was 3 years ago. We did, part of the ride was about transitioning the generation. And symbolically on the ride, we did a whole thing of turning over the end when we did our reveal of how much money was raised from an older person. When I say older, someone my age, to somebody who was under 30.
Or my age.
Your age. Because so kids under the age of 30 probably don't know anyone who's died of HIV. People over the age of 30 do know what that was like. And so you're not necessarily able to best understand it or teach it as well. So as part of us doing that, the 6 agencies that benefit from the event also got into these conversations once a month, and they started hiring some of their social workers and things that were of a younger generation, that were more into a much more liberal conversation. Like, for me, and I'm sure for you, if someone said when we were growing up, you're a fag or you're queer, that was a stab in the heart, because that was someone making fun of you. The younger generation owns that word queer, and they don't see it as an offense. And it's really hard sometimes for me when I'm with them and they go, well, identify as queer. I'm like, well, that's an insult from my generation, because and I get that they're owning it. So if you own it, it's sort of like a black person saying a word I can't say. They can say it because they own it. I can't say it.
And I find it fascinating, and because I know so much about the ride and I've been a part of it for so long, I find it fascinating that the ride also gives people a reason to talk about it. Because the first conversation is, I'm doing this bike ride, I'm doing 165 miles from Miami to Key West, and people go,
crazy.
You're crazy, or oh my God, that's amazing. How are you doing this? Who's right? And it's different than like the MS rides, and there's other rides, which leads me to my next question is, what makes the ride so unique compared to some of these other rides? So, obviously the ride bridges the gap for conversation, generations, etc., to bring the attention back to HIV. But why your ride versus, let's say, one of the other MS rides, or one of those that people could do?
The thing that, so The original rides, the ones we talked about before, that were the Team Pilata Teamworks,
Right.
Pilata Teamworks, their model was so amazing at full service and care. So everything you could need or want on the event was available. So we are a moving city over 2 days. We provide housing overnight. We provide all the food. We have rest stops every 15 to 20 miles. At every rest stop, there's medical people, there's porta potties, there's apples and bananas and Gatorade and all the things you need to stay fueled. There's cheerleaders on the road. There's it's it's and then overnight, we don't camp out because it's Florida and it's hot and the weather changes, and so we stay in a resort. We have a big tent that goes up, so we do things to build a community. And there are people that get on the ride that don't know anyone else who's HIV positive, and they meet other folks just like them, and they realize they're not alone in the world.
Right.
And so you build all of that, and then the biggest thing we hear all the time is, I do a lot of bike rides, but yours is the only one that goes over and beyond to make sure everything. I never feel unsafe. I never feel left alone out there. We have bike transport, rider transport, sweep vehicles, SAG vehicles. And so if you break down or you get hurt or you just didn't train enough or the weather's too windy or it's too hot out and you can't go as far as you thought you could, we're there to support you. And everyone wears a band that has an emergency number on it, and everybody has identification on their helmets and on their bikes with their number on it. So if they get separated from the bike, if they get dehydrated and are a little loopy, and we can figure out who that person is, and then we can address it with our medical team that shows up, or we call an ambulance. We always tell them, call an ambulance first, then call our emergency number, and if we've got someone in that area, we'll support it. So I think there are things that we do. We're also a dry event. Not every event is a dry event. By dry, I mean no alcohol or drugs are permitted on the event.
Because like you want to do that on a bicycle. No offense, but you're 165 miles. You don't want to do that drunk, I'm assuming. But okay.
Or dehydrated because you rode 100 miles on day one. Your body is being pushed down, and then you go ahead and have alcohol, and then the next day when you get up after 6 hours of sleep, how sharp are your decision making? How fast are you going to react to a car that's coming by alongside you and someone yells, car back, so you know that you have to move over a little bit on the road to stay safe. You can't do that when you're somewhat impaired. When you get to Key West, game on, do whatever you want. You're not my responsibility anymore. And we have lots of parties in Key West following the event to celebrate. I think our destination is what really is one of the things that makes us unique as well. Riding to Key West and over the 43 bridges, and it's a sight. It's
incredible.
Yeah, I've ridden, as you know, when I turned 50. So the ride was already 10 years or something like that into that, or 8 years into it. And I had always been on the production side, but never on the actual riding side of it. And being on that bicycle for someone who's not athletic at all was such a different experience because you're in your head alone a lot of that time. And I remember going over one of the bridges, and one of the billfish, which is a big sailing fish, jumped out and bowed. And it was over one of the bridges. And it was one of those moments that you're like, I never would have seen that in a car.
Never.
It was such a different kind of, almost like he came out to bow at me because I was doing this. It was
yes,
cool.
Because even nature bows at your grace.
Right, exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
So, but this. So this story is really good. So because I'm not athletic, and because my mother, loved my Jewish mother, but she said, when I told her I was going to ride, she said, "You're not going to do it." I said, "Ma, I'm going to do it. You're never going to do it. What are you talking about? You're not going to do it." And so I was like, "Really?" So the morning of the ride, we do chalking late in the day, so it'll be like, "Go Keith, you're the best, Susie." You got
messages on the street for the riders, so that as they ride,
they that last bit of motivation as they're getting really tired in the day, and they've been out there and they've got another 15 miles to go. It just gives them that little burst, so like Fresca in your panty shields. It just gets you going a little bit further than you thought you could. So we had just started the day. We were a mile and a half out of opening. On a 100-mile day. We were only a mile and a half out. And on the road in chalk, it said, "We love you, Glenn, go." So first I got emotional and I started to tear up. And then I thought, those son of a bitches don't think I'm going to make it to the first rest stop. They didn't think I was going to make this first 15 miles. And I got angry. I was like, what the hell? Did my mother come out here and do this?
Right. Absolutely.
So I rode
Oh
the
God,
full
that's
100
funny.
miles out of nothing else at that point other than to prove everybody else once again wrong. And then
That's
after the
funny.
ride was over, I said to my mother, she goes, you did amazing, blah, 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 blah. I went up it was right before Thanksgiving. So I saw my family right after that. And I said, despite what you said, Ma, what did I say? Said, you said you'll never do it. I never said that. I'm like, Ma, we've had multiple conversations. You said
Yeah.
you will never do this. So,
Well, in coming from a personal standpoint, the reason I love the ride so much and the way that you guys do it is that I can actually involve my mom, because I'm not going to put my mom in a tent. No offense. If I'm part of one of the other AIDS rides that are across the country, a lot of them, the second, third, fourth night are done in a tent. Luckily, This is only 2 nights. But the fact that you guys are at Hawks Cay currently, and I think that you still are for the next
we're
year or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that there's a warm shower, a soft bed, all those good things means that I can washer and dryer, but it means that I can involve other family members that are not part of the ride that get to be part of my experience. That I don't have to be by myself in that, and then it also allows me to relate to people. So when Thanksgiving does happen, we get to talk about the ride. We don't have to talk about politics or the election. We get to talk about the ride. Right. And how much fun we had on the ride. And that's what I take away from it.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of people that, I think for everybody, if you've been on this event, it's changed you, but it's hard to explain to other people why it's so different than anything else they'll ever do. And I don't even know that I have a good answer for that, other than that it is a community coming together to make a difference, that it is changing lives, that it opens your eyes to other things. It's a personal challenge. It's the view. There's so many things about it. And it's like a love bubble. You're in this safe love bubble for 2 days of people that are doing something that none of your other friends necessarily, or your larger world at work or whatever it is, doesn't understand. But this group does and shares those moments with you. They share the flat tires. They share the, someone falling off their bicycle. They cheer each other on. They help someone else change a flat tire that they don't even know. They do all these things, without looking for anything in return, but get such reward out of that. And it's so hard sometimes, to just get someone to do it. I'm like, just come on and volunteer, because I promise you the next year you're going to want to ride. You're going to see this energy and these cheerleaders and people on the road and just that love that's out there and the good that you can do that, that's how it's grown from that first year of 200 people to, we average 750 participants a year. That's where we cut it off.
And you started at 165,000, raising 165,000 that first year. And last year you hit over $1 million.
1.4 million.
$1.4 million from the little ride that could. And why is that significant for the riders? Why, because, for me, obviously it's significant, and I know this, and I'm going to say this to the listeners out there, is that I got to decide where some of my money went. Can you tell everybody a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So one of the biggest, I mentioned, there's 2 things that make us truly unique. One is that we guarantee the 100% of every dime that our participants raise will go back to the benefiting agencies, and also fund a 10% lifeline that we have. The second half of the money that you raise, you decide how you want it distributed amongst those 6 benefiting agencies. So if you live in Orlando and you want your money to stay in your own backyard, you can designate half your money to your agency. If you live in Key West, which is a small community, you can give back 100% of your half to them. But you can also say, you know what, I was really impressed by somebody that I met at a rest stop that works in another organization, and I want to give them 20% of my 50% I have to play with. And so the agencies have an opportunity to build a community and relationships. And I think that without knowing what it was going to do, was the thing that made us so unique to every other organization. Because when you try to bring 6 organizations together to try to work in tandem, and they're all different sizes, the biggest agency is going to say, we're doing more work, so we don't want to recruit more people so that the money goes to somebody else. In this case, you're not just getting the money, but you're being forced during the course of the year to actually bike ride yourself, do outreaches, do fundraising, get the community to know what your organization does. A lot of these organizations that we work with really didn't have a marketing program 16 years ago. They had somebody there that, they would have a gala or something, but they weren't in the community. Nobody knew who they were. I remember being asked by one of our volunteers, why are we giving money to a place called Broward House? What is that? I'm like, it's the oldest HIV/AIDS organization in Broward County, but because you've not needed their services, you don't know what they do. And
Right.
now, the community, if you say Broward House, everybody knows who they are and what they do, because they've been able to take that and expand on throughout the year other things they can do to bring the community in to support them. And so
I just feel like this is a big, major love fest. It was something that you created out of love. It was something that you created out of frustration.
I'm still single.
And you're still single. Well, and and it's funny that you talk about that, because you needed an identity to talk about. And at the very beginning of this, you talked about needing an identity when you went to these parties and stuff. Right. And what do you do? And I think it's important that people know that you're more than just the Smart Ride guy. I mean, I know you as a friend, but you're more than a Smart Ride guy. That you have Bona Italian restaurant now, so you're a restaurant owner.
Right. And the irony of it is now when someone says, "What do you do?" I don't usually say I say I work for a nonprofit or I do nonprofit work. I don't say I'm the founder of, or, we've raised $11.8 million in the last 16 years, because that makes it sound egotistical and like, oh, well, I can't talk to him. So it's a weird kind of thing. I went from needing a sense of purpose to going, well, I went a little too high. You need to be somewhere more humble, right in the middle. So
bring it back a little bit. Well, it's nice that because now you've got a group of volunteers and a group of paid staff that are sponsored by some corporations, so that way the riders' money does stay 100% to the not-for-profits, which I find amazing that you've built this ride that went from 200 riders to 750 riders to almost 1,000 people or 1,200 people involved totally, and that you were still able to keep that original promise that started all this, that yes, we're going to raise money, but we're going to give 100% of it back to the charities, and that rider promise is still there. That's incredible.
And in honesty, like, I told you earlier that it was only supposed to happen one time to prove a point. And then everyone who had volunteered had been only volunteering for like 4 months. So they were still like, oh, this is so great. So they all wanted to do it again. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. And so, I agreed the second year, and then the third year, okay, we'll do it one more time, and then that's it. And the numbers were going up from 169 to 269 to 369. And then it finally got to a place where some of the volunteers were burning out, because it wasn't really a part-time job. It really was, putting a lot of hours in a week to make this happen. And so we had to go back to the agencies and say, you guys want us to keep going, but we can't do it in the model that we're doing, but we have to keep the 100%. And so what we did was go to them and say, we need you to help us produce this event. So you're each going to take on a little responsibility, whether it be for the housing overnight in the Keys, whether it be for helping us with our dining and our food, coordinating our food operators, regardless of all those little things that have to happen on orientation day. And so each one of them was given a little bit more responsibility. And then they were also all tasked with helping raise some money to produce the event, but it had to be outside money. It had to be new money. And if they were already getting money from an organization, let's say it's Gilead, which is a pharmaceutical. If they were getting $10,000 a year from Gilead, and they wanted to come in and they needed to get $5,000 for us, they needed Gilead to understand that money was to help them with the Smart Ride, had nothing to do with supporting their organization directly. So no one could ever come back and say, you didn't give back 100% because the agency wrote you a check for $5,000. And so that was really critical to me, that is so clear that there is no crossover of where that money's coming from, that it's still truly the 100%. And so we worked that out, and that helped offset some of the costs of the event. And, there's a registration fee, and that helps offset some of the housing. But, it's an expensive proposition to put together, our lovely warehouse. And
the lovely warehouse that you're sitting at. And I actually love the fact that you're at the warehouse, because I think it shows the people watching this that, that you're not overspending this money on this glamorous, office space, that you're still doing it as a not-for-profit, watching every single time.
And being here, that this is not glamorous right now. We just moved into this space.
And actually you reduced your size so that way you could keep your rent the same. So I think that's incredible. But I want to give a little shout out to your sponsors. I think that's kind of important as we're getting towards the end of the show, because those sponsors are really the main reason I feel like just by listening to this conversation, that you're still able to keep that promise that every dollar given to a rider goes to the benefiting agencies. So who are some of the sponsors, and how long
this
been
is
involved?
Our third year of a title. We have a title sponsor called Can Community Health. They're out of the Sarasota area, and they do a lot of HIV/AIDS work, similar to what AIDS Health Foundation, if people know that, do as well. Was it 501(c)(3) or something? They get some federal funding that then they end up pushing out, and so they're our title sponsor. And then we have like Merck, which has been a $10,000 a year sponsor for probably the last 8 years. Gilead is like a $10,000 a year sponsor. Then organizations or a place like Lips, which is a drag dinner show.
Yeah.
We do one show a year with them, and that night raises $10,000, which all goes to production. So we're really careful about how many fundraisers we do, because we don't want to conflict with the confusion of I gave money for Smart Ride. It's like, well, no, you gave money at an event to help produce Smart Ride, as opposed to you gave it to a rider. And so we don't do too many large fundraisers, but we do a couple a year. Obviously, this year everything's different because of COVID. But Lips it's basically close to $8,000 to $10,000 sponsor, and there's a bunch more that I'll beat myself up for not remembering right now.
But we'll make sure that they're added into the description. So I think a great way to end this show is to talk about how this year is different than last year's, and why it's more important this year to raise money like never before.
Yeah.
Because you're still keeping that 165, because the whole idea is the 165 miles from Miami to Key West. So I love the idea that you kept the 165 in the reimagining of the Smart Ride. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that?
Reimagined.
I love it.
Across the board, all nonprofits are suffering deeply because they can't do their normal galas and fundraisers and car washes and all those things that are what we consider unrestricted funds. And so there's restricted funds and unrestricted. When you as an organization, get a grant from the federal government for something, it's very restricted. It'll pay for a procedure, but it won't pay for the bridge to get to the procedure or to get the test done for the procedure. Smart Ride money and a lot of the fundraising that nonprofits do during the course of the year is considered unrestricted funds. In our case, they're directed but unrestricted. So we have limitations on how you can use it. You can't get a new furniture for your office. You can't give your execs a bonus, but you can hire a therapist, or you can, get bus passes. And this is one of those things that is actually a trigger for a lot of people. And they go, I don't want to buy a bus pass. I want to help somebody with their meds. Well, what they have to understand is that if I can get someone a bus pass, they can get to the pharmacy and get their meds.
Right.
Because a lot of people are 100%. Economically depressed and they don't have that money. So if they get food assistance, they need to be able to get to Pavarello. But if they don't have a car, they can't get there. If they need to get to a doctor, I'm fortunate. I can call you and you'll say you'll be there and you won't, and then I'll take an Uber. But for a lot of these folks, they're
That's a lie, by the way, if you're listening. It's a lie.
It is a lie. It is a lie. I wouldn't ask him. That's the lie. I wouldn't have even bothered to ask.
Right, exactly. Keep moving.
Keep moving, yeah. Good luck with that. But we can find a way to get there. These folks, their friends and people are in the exact same boat that they're in, and they don't have the extra money. So if you can't provide a way for people to get to the service, then the service is worthless, because you can't do that.
If you're buying people's meds but they have no way to get there, it makes no difference. The meds still sit there without being used. So I totally get that. And so then why? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. And the same thing.
No, go ahead.
No, and so why is this year? How are you guys redoing it this year because of COVID? Because obviously everything's changed, but you still need to have this fundraiser because of these essential benefits that the organizations are able to provide because of your money.
Right. So the first six months of the year, when COVID kicked in, the benefiting agencies that we assist lost $1 million in outside funding because they weren't able to do any of their regular stuff. But yet the need for services went up because people were finding themselves let's say you were a waiter, or you worked for Citrix, or you worked for American Express, and there were cutbacks and you were temporarily laid off. Suddenly you're food insecure for the first time in your life. So now you're leaning on these organizations that are also seeing less money come in and trying to make those ends meet. And all of our organizations have kept their services going. They've gone into reserves. They're doing everything they can to not cut back so people get what they need. They may have had to cut back on some of the things they do internally, but they're not cutting back on how they help people pay their rent if they get stuck because they're short, or have the utilities turned off, which in Florida, you lose your air conditioning in the summer, you might as well just like call it quits. So
Right.
it became very important. And so what we did, because we knew that as a result of COVID, we weren't going to be able to move 750 people as a group from Miami to Key West.
100%.
So we reimagined the ride, and we've asked people to do their version of 165 over the course of 3 days instead of 2. So we have a lot of riders in different counties. Like we have a group in Palm Beach that's riding up to Hutchinson Island. They're going to stay overnight. It's a group of 12 people. They train with each other. They're doing their social distancing, and they're participating to raise the money. And then for those who don't feel comfortable or aren't strong riders that are worried about not having those support services that we normally provide, we've told them take that 165 and we have someone doing 16.5 miles of stand-up paddleboarding over the weekend of the event. And they're able to send out a letter and raise money for that. We have people that are volunteering 16.5 hours at one of our agencies or anywhere in town. And again, raising money by saying, I'm doing this to make a difference. This is what I've committed to. Will you help me? We have people running, 1.65 miles. My sister in New York and my niece and my nephew are all going to walk in Manhattan over the weekend, 16.5 miles. So you could do anything. We're working with the bars to see, because the bars have been hit really hard because everything in the hospitality industry has just been slaughtered. And so we didn't want to ask a lot of the bars that help us for anything, but what we're working with them right now is over that weekend to do like a push-up challenge and a relay with the different bars. They'll all meet at one. They'll have a team. Someone will do, let's say it's 10 push-ups, and then the next person will jump in and do it, and then raise maybe some tip money in a separate jar. Because again, we don't want to take away from their income this year, but we want to try to raise as much as we can. So right now, last year you mentioned we raised 1.4 million. This year, if we can get to 700,000, these agencies, it'll make such a difference.
That's incredible.
Honestly. And right now we're just
during COVID. Crazy.
And right now we're at just about $500,000. So, a lot of money comes in the last 3 weeks and people are really kicking in. So I feel very comfortable that we can easily get to 6. And if we could get to 7, that's a blessing. 6 agencies, they'll all get a little bit something different because of the way we distribute it, but it's going to be the only unrestricted funding that's coming in to soften the blow this year, and keep the momentum going so that next year, if everything works out well, we'll be able to be back on the road, the full number, 165 miles. And maybe this will even open up another opportunity for people to participate that never been able to because they don't ride a bike.
Right, 100%. And then how do people connect with each other? So you got people in Tampa, you got people in Miami, you got people in Fort Lauderdale, people in Key West, all doing separate things. Are they able to see each other? Are they able, how do you create that community based on long distance?
Okay, so there's 2 things that we're doing. One of the most exciting is that we have I don't even know why I have an alarm set. That's crazy.
That's funny. You have people being connected.
Oh, so what we're doing, thank you. So our agency spread out throughout the state. So what we have is the executive director of our agency in Tampa riding with the AIDS flag to our agency in Orlando. They're turning the flag over to their executive director, who's going to ride it down to Palm Beach, and turn it over to their executive director, who rides it to Broward County. And this thing will continue an Olympic torch style relay with the AIDS flag till it gets to Key West, bringing the entire state together in a year where we're all separated, so you can see that we're still together in some fashion. The other thing that we're doing is each one of our benefiting agencies is going to have an open house over that weekend, so people will be able to connect through that and go live on Facebook and things and see it. And then the most important thing is that we have an app. And when they're registered, they can get on the app, and the app shows where you are over that weekend. So if you've checked in and opened your app over the weekend, it'll tag you. So we have riders in San Diego, we have people doing stuff in New York and in Texas. Last year we had 39 states represented on the ride. Our goal is to get to something like that this year on the map. So when you go and log in and you're by yourself in Tampa on an open road and you've stopped for some water, and then you look at your phone, after you've stopped, you look at your phone, safety first. You can say, you know what, I'm not alone. Look at all these people raising awareness for HIV and AIDS this weekend, and I'm part of this bigger group that's, raising the voice, saying the word AIDS, because if you say it, you make it real,
Right.
and then connecting in their own way, with photos and things that'll go up. They go, oh my God, I love that pit stop. I love when we always stop there at Baby's Coffee. I can't wait for next year, and bring that heartstring and emotion back.
Right. Well, and I mean, we've gone over our time a little bit, but I thought it was kind of important to talk about the differences between this year and last year, and the fact that hopefully, fingers crossed, that we go back to kind of a more normal life. But Glenn, it has been an incredible hour. I thank you so much for being my very first guest on the new series. Thank you very much for behind the scenes. I couldn't think of anybody better. 165 miles from Miami to Key West, Smart Ride in its 17th year, raising over $11 million. Help them this year get even to 12 million or even over 12 million. You can go to the www.thesmartride.org to make a donation or to sign up, be a participant. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. I hope we're going to be doing this about once a month, and I've already got some great guests lined up. So I hope you tune in next month. And if you're listening to our podcast, again, go to www.thesmartride.org and donate. Everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith, for making me your first guest, and this was great. I really appreciate it.
It was awesome. It was awesome. All right, everybody, goodbye, and we will see you next time.